What's up, everybody? Happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone who celebrates or acknowledges it. I'll announce some tour dates here. April 4th, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Speaking of a city that celebrates St. Patrick's Day. April 18th, that is a virtual show at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. It's free, too, by the way. May 16th, Los Angeles, California. June 5th, New York City. And August, I will be at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in Edinburgh, Scotland. Tickets and information at romplacone.com. I'll be announcing the information for Edinburgh real soon. All of these stand-up shows coming up in the States are preview shows of my new Fringe Hour Anti-Fascist Pasta Night. I'm so excited for y'all to see it. It is a night of hard-hitting political comedy, dealing with the state of the world, and always anti-fascist. Again, tickets and all information at romplacone.com. And, of course, Left at Wall is out now, and you can check out Left at Wall on a bunch of different platforms. I recommend Tubi, because on Tubi, it is free. All right, enjoy today's episode. Episode 131, David Rovics. David Rovics is a musician, songwriter, anarchist, and activist. I've been listening to David for over 20 years, having first discovered his music when the Iraq War jolted me awake and I started participating in the anti-war movement in the United States. If you're not familiar with him, you're about to learn why this is the perfect episode for St. Patrick's Day. Please welcome to the show, David Rovics. David Rovics, how are you? Been a minute.
Yeah, Ron, great to see you. Yes, it's been years apparently, but I lose track so easily. If somebody has a child, then I can remember things, because it's like, oh, the kid's now like 6 and they were 4 last time. But otherwise,
yeah, that's how it
goes. Sometimes they grow up entirely before you see them again. Then you're like, oh, geez, I guess it's been 18 years.
I saw some of my family in Italy. This was like years after I had met them for the first time. And I went up to some of the kids, like they had a couple kids, and I went up to one of the kids and I said, hey, do you remember me? And they're all my cousins. And my older cousin, like the parents, they go, Ron, they weren't born. You never met them before.
But they look like you when you were that age. Yeah.
And I was like, well, where's Stefano? And then they were like, turn around. I turn around. There's this like 6'2", like, like college kid. And I'm like, oh my God, it was that long ago. I'm so old. It's wild. But
it keeps happening to me where I see somebody with gray hair and it just doesn't occur to me that that's the guy that I'm looking for, because they had black hair 20 years ago when I knew them. And that keeps happening. At my age, that's a very common phenomenon where the person your age that you're not looking for an old man. You're looking for the guy that you remember who didn't have white hair.
So let's start at the beginning. Give me the David Rovics origin story. Where are you from?
I was born in Manhattan. My mother would be proud for me to say, which is true, though. Anyway, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then we moved to the suburbs when I was 2.
Okay, so you grew up in New York.
Grew up in Connecticut, in the suburbs of New York City, yeah.
What'd your folks do?
They're both, my mom just died last fall, but my father's still around, and they're both classical musicians. My dad's a composer and a pianist, and my mom was a brilliant pianist.
Now, condolences. And so when did you start picking up the family trade? Like, when did you start picking up instruments?
At the age of 9, for some reason, I don't know why 9, but my mother asked me what instrument I wanted to play. And it definitely wasn't like optional, as far as I recall. It was, but I had options as far as which one. And I said cello for some reason. I don't remember particularly why, but my sister, when she was 9 and was asked what instrument she wanted to play, she said flute. And I suspect in both cases it's because I was named after a cellist and she was named after a flutist. But that's just, neither one of us were conscious about these decisions at the time. But
so it was subconscious, like you didn't know you were named after a cellist.
I knew I was named David, and our a very close family friend and colleague that my parents worked with a lot and had and studied with, who was a bit older than them, was a cellist, an amazing cellist, and I always assumed I was named after him, even though my parents never said I was named after him.
So did they play in like orchestras, or were they educators, or a little bit of everything? Like what all did that involve?
Yeah, they both. My dad taught for 33 years at Long Island University, composition and theory and stuff, and he composed a lot of different things for a lot of different sorts of ensembles that were. You can look him up on Spotify even and
Oh
find
wow.
some of his stuff. Yeah, it's
So
very few of his compositions that he actually recorded himself with his wife, who is an opera singer.
so you start playing the cello, and then how did that evolve into the guitar?
I guess it was really not a direct, sort of thing, but when I was 12, 13, I was going to a summer camp where there were people singing songs around a campfire, and it was of a political nature. So it was my early exposure to kind of like the kind of thing I do now, basically, and have done most of my adult life. But so in sort of associated with the anti-nuke movement. But the I really honestly, by my best recollection, quit playing the cello because I was tired of the conflict around how much I was or wasn't practicing. And then I didn't play any music for a fair bit, maybe a year or two. And then I got into psychedelic drugs, and that led me to get into playing the guitar because I wanted to play an instrument of some kind while I was tripping. And eventually I ended up with a very small, very like almost toy guitar, just because it was easy to carry around in the woods with me when I was doing LSD, which I was doing a lot in my late teens. And then I accidentally started getting good at playing the guitar. And then got more serious about it in my early 20s and got a real instrument. Not very good instrument, but, one that would stay in tune,
Well, what were you listening to at this point in time?
almost exclusively the Grateful Dead
Okay. Oh,
for
so you
years.
got all right. Yeah, so you really
I
got
was a serious teenage deadhead hippie LSD head reading and, sort of reliving the 60s as best as I possibly could.
what came first, the drugs or the dead for you?
The drugs.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I had heard the Grateful Dead before a little bit, but they didn't really connect with me until I first did acid, and boy, did they connect at that point.
So I've known you for years, and I never knew that about you, that you were a deadhead. I'm a little surprised, not shocked, but a little surprised. I don't
Yeah, I
mean that
don't
in a bad
know
way or a good
what
way.
kind of
Just
image I put out now, but certainly that's things change over time.
are you still? Do you still like the dead? Are you still a deadhead?
Oh, I love the Dead. Yeah, absolutely. I
Mhm.
mean, I never listen to them hardly at all unless I'm sort of, introducing somebody to some music or long drive with somebody maybe, but I don't really listen to recorded music a whole lot, but
Mhm.
generally. So, but I still think they're brilliant, and they were really one of my main kind of avenues to bluegrass and to traditional trad music of all kinds was through the Dead, and which is a kind of weird that's the case given that my parents are both musicians, but that's maybe probably how it is for probably, I don't know, many thousands of people first got into bluegrass, even though I mean I was living in New England, which actually has a pretty good bluegrass tradition all over the place, but I had no idea. And, I discovered that later, but, an old time music and, what we tend to call Americana these days. I mean, that was all over the place. I just wasn't really aware of it, but the Grateful Dead, was sort of Jerry Garcia in particular, and then Old and in the Way and, the stuff he did with Dave Grisman. So it's sort of a path towards bluegrass for some of us.
So what kind of led you to the like punk folk troubadour that we all know and love?
Well, I got into basically I got into sort of bluegrassy kind of style playing, and I got into political songwriting, basically more or less parallel tracks, and then people started calling the music I was doing folk punk in the late '90s, and I wasn't using the term, and I wasn't really particularly into punk, but I was playing the guitar like I guess in a sloppy, fast kind of way that, looking back, has a punk sensibility about it, or at least looking back was, you know, apparent, according to Wikipedia, definitional for the folk punk style of the late '90s. I don't know. Whatever. I'm in there. As a iconic, representation of the style from a certain period. But this was all before I ever got into punk or used the term folk punk, and I didn't really get into punk until until 2001. Which was, I believe, right? I think that's right. 2001, when I first toured with Attila the Stockbroker, traveling around England and Scotland, Wales, and it was through his mangy cassette collection that I was introduced to, bands like Rancid and Bad Religion and all sorts of. The Clash, and I mean, I had heard their hits before, but I hadn't gotten into the whole style really.
Did you take a deep dive? Like, were you really into it?
I really got into I really got into the style of music and the sensibility more than sort of getting really into punk rock bands and listening to a lot of punk. But I listened to a lot of it by accident, and by traveling with him, and then also hanging out with other folks in the sort of what you could call the singer-songwriter scene, which people associate with folk music because they're playing acoustic instruments. But like people like Alistair Hewlett and Rob Johnson, who I also toured with and hung out with a lot, they also love punk rock, but people don't think of them that way. Attila maybe has more of that reputation because he often has a band, with an electric guitarist in it,
Yeah. So, I kind of went the opposite. I mean, I got really into punk when I was like 12, and then I went through a period of time where that's all I listened to, and everything else is just a forgotten memory. And then after a couple of years of that, you kind of get over that, and you just sort of embrace all types of music. But I always, always love, like a lot of the punk rock, and it's always sort of at the top of my listening habits. Some of those eras stood the test of time better than others, but yeah, like it's always just sort of in the ethers for me. Well, what did your what got you into politics? Like, what really radicalized you?
I mean, I guess it was the anti-nuke movement, and really at the time when I was a kid, it was just sort of a recognition I began to have when I was 12 that the world was a really messed up place. I mean, my first sort of introduction in a real way, in terms of like, on the ground activism that I was exposed to, was the anti-nuke movement, and really, actually, I mean, well, the progressive agenda more broadly. I mean, I think the first march I was ever in was probably 1982, and Jesse Jackson was leading it. But and it was like sort of, I don't even remember what it was about. It was like the whole progressive agenda, basically. That I remember seeing signs about everything. But I mean, growing up in a prosperous 98% or so white town in Connecticut, and then sort of leaving the town to the next nearest city and seeing just really pretty desperate poverty and dejected, depressed looking people and dirt and project housing that was falling apart. I mean, it was just such a contrast to the town I grew up in, and it was so nearby. And it seemed to be, I believe, the town where most of the bus drivers lived that worked at the high school and the junior high school. So, I mean, I guess that was part of my reality since I was born, but I started noticing it when I was 12. And that's also when I started reading newspapers at the library at the junior high school, where I was. The libraries were always a nice place to hang out. I found them to be a good scene without obnoxious people. The nicer people like to hang out in the libraries. It seemed to me, I guess. I don't know. I think of those years, and I was always hanging out in libraries, but reading newspapers. I guess I was probably the only 12-year-old I knew that was reading the New York Times every day. I'm sure there were others out there, but not in my school.
Were your parents political? Like, did they kind of push that too, or no?
Yeah, my father was much more like in the early 70s. He got into all sorts of alternative lifestyle kind of stuff, which has all sorts of you could say political aspects to it, but I mean very political in many ways. I mean his sort of things like group therapy and dream analysis and sort of healthier emotional ways to relate to other people and raise children and that kind of thing that was really big. And I benefited so much from the 60s, which kind of happened in the 70s. I think a lot of institutions that were built by people who went through the 60s and wanted to sort of actualize some of those ideas, and like the school I went to, it started in 1970 and closed in 1980. I mean, it's perfect. A lot of things did that. But my mother was more sort of political in the traditional pre-60s, pre-hippie kind of sense, more, sort of left-wing in that kind of, although always a loyal Democrat, regardless of the contradictions. But other than, asking her who she's voting for, she really was, had a left, orientation around, things like race, class, gender, imperialism,
So what does it mean to you to be an anarchist?
It's, anarchism originally back in the 19th century was part of the whole socialist phenomenon that had many different aspects to it. And the anarchist socialists were the ones who we would today more often call libertarian socialists, or people who at the time were known as libertarians, which didn't mean the same thing that people think of it now as meaning. But like the biggest anarchist, or one of the biggest anarchist groups in the early 20th century in the U.S. Were mainly known as libertarians, the Gallianists, and their publication, The Chronicles of Subversion, which I can't remember what that is in Italian, but that was it. I mean, so I mean, I would say what it means. What it means is, I don't have a good pat answer for this question. I should have good answers for everything, but I mean, because what it means to be part of the socialist movement more broadly, I think, is and the anarchist tendency within it is is kind of, I guess, how I'd frame that question. And it means to be in support of a society that's cooperative and not based on things like nationalism, racism, and oppression, but based on cooperatives and building a society together to fulfill each other's mutual needs. A society based on solidarity with institutions like unions and cooperatives at the heart of it. So, like, that's, I would say that's what it means to be a socialist, and to be more specifically from the libertarian end of socialism. It means to live in a society where there's real freedom of speech and discourse, not based on who has money or who has the right ideology, but just based on who has anything to say. So I differentiate it from being, from those, I think, relatively few people actually who really truly believe in some more authoritarian version of socialism. I think actually most people don't, but things, sort of more authoritarian versions of socialism end up asserting themselves throughout history in all kinds of different situations for all kinds of different reasons. I don't think I don't think most of the time people started out thinking that's what we're going for, but it happens.
Well, when anything gets, yeah, I mean, when anything gets corrupted, it can, just go down an authoritarian road,
And I think I should have read some Sartre. I've never read Sartre, but somebody quoted apparently one of the things he said was football is endlessly complicated by the existence of the opposing team. And I think that's a great one, And you could say it about like war, like they say, no battle strategy survives the first engagement with the enemy, something like that. That's how it is with organizing and with trying to build a socialist society as well. Things can, for all kinds of reasons, go very different directions than the way a lot of people are hoping they will.
Well, how do you think, and I know this is a super loaded question, but how do you think we could start getting closer to that goal? I mean, getting to that goal entirely, I don't know if we'll see that in either of our lifetimes, but how can we at least try to get closer?
I mean, it is such a massive question, and there's so much that we could say about that and how to do it. But I really think like the place that we're at in the English speaking world, particularly in the United States right now, for many years now, is like I would say it's like akin to being a baby that hasn't learned to walk yet, and so when people are talking about like we should engage in this or that strategy involving, climbing that wall and then swinging down that zip line and then jumping over that building. These are great ideas, but, if you're talking to a bunch of babies who haven't learned how to walk yet, none of the parkour and acrobatics are particularly useful, And, that's where we're at now. I mean, we literally at this point, at this stage in U.S. left-wing civilization, we cannot organize a rally anywhere in this country that people will leave feeling optimistic, hopeful, inspired, and educated, and like they've been part of community, like they're part of this community that is building. Almost 100% of the time for the past 10 years, anywhere in this country that I've been to a rally of any kind, it starts out boring and it ends with people feeling dejected and depressed, and half the crowd leaves before it's over. And, I'm not sure what all the different explanations for how it is that the left, or whatever remains of the left here in this country, has gotten to the point where we don't believe in culture or communicating in any way that involves music, theater, puppetry. All those things are out the window. And, all you have at rallies these days for years now is people shouting into a microphone and telling us all things we already know, all things that we are. The reason why we're there is because we already know all these things. Nobody needs to be lectured by some kid about how bad the situation is. What we need is a social movement that has optimism and vision, and that, and also very importantly, that is deeply musical and rooted in our culture, in this society, so our cultures, however we want to phrase that, but in culture, with music that embraces things like musical traditions and music generally, and culinary traditions and food generally, and that is alive and part of society, and that attracts people rather than repels them, that interests passersby rather than alienates them. I mean, that is that's the kind of we need to be able to put add two and two together. Basically, at this point, we need to be able to organize a rally that actually inspires people and leaves them feeling optimistic, which is like 20 years ago, that would be like saying, we need to be able to like tie our shoes. I mean, it's really obvious. Of course, every rally needs to be inspiring. Every rally needs to foster a sense of community. Every rally, it needs to be like that. Otherwise, it's a failed effort at a rally, and that's all that we do now. And that's been the case for years. So like right now, the U.S. is, has invaded Iran, and the response, I'm waiting for the kind of response that there should be, and it's I'm not seeing it, and I think it's because the basic structure of the left is so anemic at this point that people don't even know how to organize a rally that's going to build on itself anymore.
Yeah. One of the things you brought up that I really grapple with too, and I think you also captured this in your song, not "I'm a Better Anarchist Than You," but the other one. Oh man, I'm forgetting the title, but it's about how like there will be no music at our rallies and
Vanguard.
Yes, yeah, I am the yeah. I love that song, and I think it's so spot on. And there is this weird thing. And I don't think it's all the left, but I think it's like a certain percentage, and maybe they're just a louder minority, or maybe we hear them a lot being artists ourselves, but there is this weird like, no, we don't embrace culture, we don't embrace any type of artistic expression because we are just so focused on this message, and we need to be miserable, and it's like, how are we gonna that's really a bad sell. Like, it's
yeah,
and it's also, it's not rooted in any type of history either. Like it's just like, first, Emma Goldman said it a long time ago. If there's not dancing in your revolution, I'm not interested. I mean, that right there should just put it to rest. First of all, art has always accompanied social change, always, and
always.
And music, film, comedy, poetry, all of it, theater. I mean, we used to have like a healthy anti-capitalist theater scene in the United States before the Great Depression. Like, that's all, and I would like to think that kind of thing is slowly coming back. But yeah, there's this weird like we don't embrace the arts, and why do you think that is?
I mean, I think that there's a lot of different possible explanations, and they all may or may not be related. But certainly one of them is identity politics, and the way that it has convinced so many people that that they have no culture, and or that any association that they might feel with any kind of culture is in some way cultural appropriation, whether or not that could even be, that could make any sense. But, that's the kind of feeling that a lot of people have around culture, that they're uncomfortable with it. And then there's also been a development over the past 10 or 15 years in Portland, but also I've noticed in other parts of the country as well, that's also related to identity politics. And it is basically, one of the manifestations of this orientation is basically, unless you identify with some aspect of your life that can characterize you as oppressed, like, for example, being Jewish or being trans or being gay or some kind of identity that you can grab onto that can characterize yourself as oppressed. If you don't do that, then you're not going to be getting on any stages, whether as a speaker or as a performer. So basically, you have rallies now in this city and much of the country going on for years and years now that almost never have a white person on the stage. And, it's not like that's a problem, if on a lot of occasions, but what it can lead to is, so for other reasons, having to do actually with cultural appropriation, oddly enough, we have learned over time that things like bluegrass and old-time Appalachian music, for example, is a white phenomenon, which it is not. I mean, everybody used to know in the 19th century that all the best banjo players were black. But that changed because of the music industry. And so as a result of actual cultural appropriation, we have gotten to a position now in society where it's very rare that there's somebody who fits the right description for appearing at one of these rallies who plays a guitar and sings and does that as a solo thing, and that would work easily with the kind of very bad sound system that generally is existing at most rallies, if there's any sound system at all, because you're talking about a situation where you can't have a band, right? Most of the time, these are very badly organized rallies with very bad sound systems. And so the question of a band is out of the question, right? So you kind of engineer yourself into this hole where you somehow, because of your desire to have only certain kind of people at the rally, you've basically logistically made it very, very difficult for yourself to have any live music at your rally. That's just one part of the whole explanation. But I think that what that is part of, why identity politics happened in the first place in this country, and how it took hold of the left so thoroughly, especially since the age of social media, I believe it has all been part of a broader agenda on the part of certain national secret police agencies, such as the FBI in particular, to keep the political end of society and the cultural end of society as separated from each other as possible. And the reason I believe that that's the case is because the FBI was very much engaged in suppressing organizations that were especially known for their use of culture in their movements, right? So, like, what we know about the FBI, because of the Citizens Commission to investigate the FBI raiding the offices of the FBI in Media, Pennsylvania in 1971 and making off with thousands of classified documents that let the world know about the existence of the counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO. What we know beyond any doubt whatsoever, because of those documents, is that from the FBI's inception up until 1971, it was obsessively engaged with finding every kind of underhanded way of misdirecting, misguiding,
right,
and otherwise neutralizing the American left. And the organizations, the movements that it was particularly obsessed with were extremely musical and cultural movements. Why? Because those were the movements that were the most effective. The Industrial Workers of the World, the Communist Party, the Civil Rights Movement, the Anti-War Movement, Students for a Democratic Society, the Black Panther Party. All these groups and all these types of movements were obsessively musical, and artistic. But that was very key to their success. And the FBI was very well aware of that. And so the anti-war movement specifically, I think, really shook this society to its foundations. You had millions of young men who had been convinced by this extremely musical movement originating in San Francisco and spreading throughout North America and the world. This movement that really won over the hearts and minds of a generation. and more than a generation, but particularly a generation. It won their hearts and minds. People refused to join the military. Huge numbers of people were refusing to join the military, moving to Canada and Sweden, going to prison, joining the military and then refusing to leave their bases, and so much of that, there's a lot of things that can be attributed to, but one of those things in a big way is the anti-war movement and its success in winning people's hearts and minds. And its success in that regard was largely rooted in its being such a musical, culturally based movement in the first place. Those free festivals were the model of the movement, and they worked and they spread organically like wildfire, and they scared the pants off of the establishment. And the establishment, in the form of the secret police force that we don't acknowledge as a secret police force, but which is a secret police force, the FBI, has been engaged in suppressing that kind of sentiment ever since. And because they can see how dangerous it is, because music and art is so powerful, they see that, and in ways that the left no longer does.
That's interesting. I mean, yeah, that whole unpacking is interesting, because I mean, a couple thoughts I had. I entertain the idea, or I hold the idea that identity politics, what it is actually supposed to be, and what it is on its own, is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. The problem, and what I think you described, and maybe this is just a semantic thing, but is the weaponization of identity politics for dishonest means. And that's what you described. That's what we're dealing with. And I see that connection. The other thing that I kind of see, like if I was asking myself that question, I do think some of it is just good old United States brainwashing, where, and you can speak to this better than I can, because you've played more parts of the world than I have. We're one of the only, developed countries where the arts aren't considered part of what it means to be human and are considered a luxury. And like we don't fund it at all. I think you were the one that told me that, where it's just like our arts funding is less than a tenth of other industrialized countries on average, and even that tenth is misleading.
It's 1/100th. I mean, the U.S. is 100 times. Europe has 100 times the arts budget that the U.S. has, and of that 1%, 60% of it is military spending.
Yes, so you were the person that told me that. Yeah, you were the person that told me that. You're where I heard that. I've repeated that since, and yeah, you're the one who I heard it from first. So it's like I think part of it is just that.
I mean, I think that arts funding is really bad, but then so is generally public funding for other things that European countries fund, like healthcare and mental health, housing. There's so many ways that those societies are funding all sorts of things that we just leave up to the free market, or leave up to capitalism, or leave up to the pop stars, and everybody else is screwed, and that kind of. I mean, it used to be different. There used to be a lot more art spending in this country. And also there used to be a huge college music scene that wasn't public spending, but it functioned as that. And, that also died a while ago. But I think the way that the Puritan tradition that we have here is part of it. I mean, that's always something that is available to be weaponized by anybody trying to misdirect the left group. You can always get some kind of traction with arguments if you're talking to Americans. And you say something like that's too frivolous. You can appeal to their puritanical, the roots or associations, and you can get somewhere with that kind of argument in a way that you won't in most of the world. But of course, the reason why these kinds of arguments can work in the first place, and possibly anybody saying, well, if we can't have the right kind of person to sing on our stage, we don't want any music on the stage, or to say we don't need any music on the stage because it's too frivolous, or we have too many organizations that were involved with putting on this rally, which is attended by like one representative of each of the 20 organizations. So we have to have, each of the 20 organizations speaking. This kind of thinking only works in the U.S., and it only works in the U.S., but it works in the U.S. because we've already killed the whole association in our movement's collective memory with the power of art and music in the first place, whereas in the rest of the world, especially outside of the Anglosphere, in anywhere you go, Mexico or, Germany, anywhere in the Middle East, pretty much. I mean, Africa, Venezuela, anywhere in Latin America. I mean, pretty much most of the world. I don't want to generalize, but I think with very few exceptions outside of the Anglosphere, particularly in places like Latin America, but also lots of the rest of the world as well beyond Latin America. Much of the Middle East, people will tell you readily, music is the beating heart of the movement. Everybody feels it. They know it. It's obvious. You have a rally in most of the world, and it is still the case that most of the program is going to be live music. That's like taken as an obvious thing. That is how you do it. That used to be the case here too.
Well, so let's get back to you. And one song I wanted to talk about in particular was St. Patrick's Battalion, which I know I've told you this in the past. Like, there was a time where I thought maybe you didn't write that song just because it is so out there in the ether, where I'm like, maybe David did cover that, but I thought he wrote it. And it's like, you did in fact write it, but it's been covered by like in a traditional folk way, like over in Ireland, and it's wild. So how? Give me like a peek under the hood. How did you come to write that song? Like, what spawned the idea? Like, give me its origin story.
Well, it's just when I look at that song, I think there's 100 other songs I've written about historical events that, to me, are just as good, and if not better in many cases. But, it's not up to me, how these things go. And it's such an honor to have been able to write one folk song in the course of my life. I've written many, many hundreds, perhaps more than 1,000 songs in my career. I've been at this for many decades. But that one time I wrote a song that somehow, sort of took its own, took off and became a folk song and got covered by dozens of bands around the world and, heard by millions of people. And it's like the song, it's one of a handful of songs that's responsible for probably most of my attention on different streaming platforms. And I was, but yeah, it's mysterious to me how these things happen. Although I guess it's an example of the kind of thing that I often tell people when they're asking about how do you write a good song. I always say the best thing to do is just tell a story, and don't tell us what you think, and don't tell us what you feel. Just tell the story and let the story, be good enough that it allows the audience to have their own emotions and their own thoughts related to the story, that you don't tell them to think or feel. And I think that song is a good example of that songwriting technique of just telling a story. But I wrote a lot of other songs that do that.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, that one, I was opening for Howard Zinn in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I lived at the time in the Boston area, as did he. And so, he was still teaching at Boston University and was very active, giving talks all over the place on a regular basis. He had already become very well known because of writing a people's history. So he was one of the various sort of intellectual celebrities that I regularly opened for at events, that when they were speaking, it would be sponsored by a left group, and the left group would be looking, as they would have thought naturally, for some musical entertainment to be part of the program. And so, they would ask me to open for him and others on a regular basis at that time. with the global justice movement and the anti-war movement of that period. That was a very common thing. So I was opening for Zinn at this church in Cambridge, and he, after I opened for him, I was listening to his wonderful talk, and in his talk, he mentioned the St. Patrick Battalion, which I don't remember reading about in any of his books, but that's where I recall first hearing about them when he talked about them. And then I thought that was a great story to write a song about. So it was one of my earlier efforts at researching on the search engine on the web, and I found websites that were dedicated to their memory, and that's and then wrote the song about them. And then it was soon after writing the song, I think, that it started getting out there in sort of ways that other songs hadn't. And I think part of that was because of my I was also touring Ireland at the time, and with the global justice movement, it was really quite something, because like if you had contact within the movement anywhere, you had contacts everywhere. It felt like I don't know. It just was like so easy to find audiences and gigs anywhere they spoke English. Even places they didn't, but especially where they did, and Ireland was certainly no exception. So I was playing all over Ireland, sort of in that scene, in the sort of global justice movement, environmental movement kind of scene. But then I was also, because of that song, getting in touch with the more sort of Irish Republican scene, which of course is a very broad thing that means a lot of things to different people, but broadly the movement for sovereignty for Ireland, which the Republican movement, which does not just mean supporters of one or another organization, but much more broadly, like sort of like saying believers in democracy or something, believers in Irish sovereignty, which could be an armed struggle, or it could be a peaceful movement, or it could just be an idea, or could be a book club, but I, after writing that song, soon after writing that song, I very vividly recall the interview that I did with the An Fóbalacht editor, the Irish, the IRA newspaper, An Fóbalacht, the Sinn Féin newspaper, because it was, and I don't remember anything about the interview. I just remember the building, because it was the most secure building I had ever been in. I don't think I'd ever been in like a U.S. embassy in some other country or a prison. I think I'd never visited a prison at that point, but this was the first building I had ever been in where there was like two iron gates, like doors with a hallway in between the two doors in case somebody wanted to set off a bomb in between the two doors. They still wouldn't be able to get off through the next door. It was just incredible. And then I was going through the second door. Then I was greeted by a 6.5 foot tall Basque guy who was like doing the security at the. So it just seemed perfect that there was a Basque guy there, and there's a big Basque Irish connection there between the Republican movements of the Basque country in Ireland, as I discovered from that point on. But yeah, that was it's open. I got invited I sang at a festival in Mexico for the first time in my life a year ago, right around St. Patrick's Day, which after writing that song, I thought maybe someday I'll get invited to sing at a festival in Mexico. And 25 years later, it happened.
Wow.
And it was, Irish music and dance is hugely popular in Mexico. And if you go there in March, it's just tremendous because like everything's green and everybody's playing music, Irish music and dancing. And there's so many good dancers and so many good players, really all over the place, really good. And I was like a celebrity for having written that song, because that everybody knows about the St. Patrick Battalion, and they love St. Patrick. They love St. Patrick Battalion, the whole thing, Catholicism generally, the color green. I mean, the whole,
Yeah.
beer, everything about it, dancing, music, everything.
No, it's an amazing. I mean, my first exposure, and I've read more about it since, but yeah, my first exposure was your song. And yeah, I mean, I just, the length of that song, like just the distance it's gone, it's just like, like I said, at one point I was just like, maybe David didn't write that. Maybe it's like, like
I
it's
love it.
incredible. Yeah.
When I wrote the song, I was trying to write a song that would sound traditional, and that's true of especially like the early 60s folk music scene, Greenwich Village. People often didn't want to take credit for having written a song, because what they really wanted people to think was that, they just found this in their grandmother's attic somewhere, and it's it's an old folk song from some lost folk song, but that's what they were going for, and certainly that's what I was going for. Was something that should sound like it could have been sung at the time.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever had? I mean, I'm sure you've gotten tons of letters and emails and stuff about that song, but have you ever gotten like somebody who, hey, my distant relative was one of the people? Like, have you ever gotten anything wild like that?
A whole bunch like that.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, of course, there's a lot of people in Mexico who have some kind of familial connection to, because most of the survivors of the battalion escaped during the last battle, which was in a convent in Churubusco, in what is now Mexico City. And so they became Mexicans and had kids and families and everything. And so there's a lot of people who are in some way or another related to those survivors of the last battle. And then there's other people. I've also heard from people who were related to members of the battalion who were not Irish, which is it was only when I first went to Mexico City in 2006 that I went to the convent where they had been staying when they were put up in a nunnery, many of them, when they first got to basically escaped from the last battle, and after the war was over, before they kind of got settled and moved into wherever they moved into. But there's a plaque on the side of that building in San Jalisco in Mexico City that has the names of the people that lived in the nunnery, and about 95% of the names are Irish, but a number of them were clearly Polish. So that was which is when I learned that there were a number of Polish members of the battalion, which Poles have a long history of also, like the Irish, of fighting for lost causes. There was also a big Polish involvement with the Haitian Revolution as well, which is a bit of lost history.
It's an amazing story. I mean, it really is. Like, and yeah, I can only imagine like some of the stuff you've been able to connect with, like as a result of that song, doing what it's done.
Yeah, it's just such it's one of the best things about writing a song that connects with people about their history somewhere in the world, because, then you just kind of are invited into their world like a member of the family, because you've written this song, and it's, I feel, get that imposter syndrome thing happening on a fairly regular basis. What am I doing hanging out with these cool rebels, I've never held a gun in my life,
Well, where do you find your hope, if you have any?
It's funny. I just saw an interview that randomly popped up on one of those social media platforms of Jesse Wells, who I think is brilliant. And of course, most people listening to this are familiar with him because that's how the internet is somehow or other. He's become a very famous and how that works. I have no idea. I'm how I get my YouTube channel deleted and he gets 500,000 subscribers. I don't know how that works. But in this interview with him anyway, he was saying what gives him hope is the knowledge that hope is essential for anything good to happen, basically. I don't remember his phrasing, but certainly for any social movement to get off the ground and be sustained and have any possibility of growing, it has to be based on a widespread sense of optimism. I mean, I think basically you need outrage, you need optimism, and you need organization. The 3 O's. And the optimism is an essential part of that. And I think you foster optimism through music, actually. But it doesn't need to exist organically in the first place. You just need to form a movement that is very musically oriented, and you can foster the optimism that way, I think. But that's necessary. So you got to be hopeful, because without hope, there's no hope. Which is a bit of a catch-22, but it's true.
So as we wrap up here, I don't want to end this on a down note, but I guess I kind of do. I do want an update here. Like, your YouTube channel was deleted, and I know you're going through the back and forth. Like, what, as of the recording of this, is the status there, and what were you told?
So let's see, the 2-minute version of this saga, I guess basically with the fall of 2023, as with so many other people, I started getting all sorts of problems with getting targeted by pro-Israel troll armies, and getting targeted for all sorts of anything I wrote that could be construed as violating some rule. So I was having songs getting taken down. I was getting warnings, and then finally in January 2025, I got my YouTube channel demonetized because of my support for violent criminal organizations. And then in November 2025, I had all of my albums deleted from YouTube Music with no explanation or notification. And then in January, last January this year, I got a strike for another song that went up, a video that went up. And then after one strike, they're supposed to give you a second strike if you violate things badly enough, and then they delete your channel, as they explained with the first strike. But they went right from the first strike to deleting my channel. And sent me an email saying your channel is being deleted, would not be put up. I appealed it. They said no right away. But then a month later, I heard about a guy named Guy Christensen, who has a very popular X account and is all over the place on the media and alternative media. He sued his college and won, and all sorts of interesting history with this guy. But he had his TikTok, YouTube, Instagram all deleted on the same day. And all for the same kinds of reasons as with me, for supporting the Palestinian cause. And then he engaged in a campaign to get his channel back up again, and was successful. And so I did the same thing as him, made a less than 2-minute long portrait framed video with captions explaining about my YouTube channel being deleted and encouraging people to boycott YouTube Premium. And that video got retweeted thousands of times, got 136,000 views. And then lo and behold, I got an email from YouTube like the day after that video went viral on X, and got an email from them saying they had reconsidered my case and decided after all that I had not been violating their standards, and they put the channel back up. And then they gave me another strike immediately afterwards for a song that was also up on the channel for years. And so I still can't access my YouTube channel, and all my albums are still deleted from YouTube Music. But theoretically, in a couple days, I'll once again have access to my YouTube channel until the next thing they decide that I'm violating, But if you support the Palestinian cause, you're invariably supporting violent criminal organizations, because international law insists that, you can liberate people from genocidal oppression, right? And that if that involves force of arms, then that's totally legal. But under YouTube's rules, anybody implementing international law is a supporter of a violent criminal organization, and that is no exaggeration or figurative anything. That is just literally the case.
Wow. Yeah, that's it's what a journey. Well, I hope it. Yeah, I mean, I hope your catalog gets back up there. But in the meantime, where can people go to learn more about you? How can people support what you're doing? When can people learn where you're coming to a town near them?
I always recommend Songkick and bands in town. If you want to follow an artist, I'm sure that includes all the comedians as well. You want to follow any artist and don't rely on social media. Go sign up on Songkick or bands in town, and then you'll get notified when they're playing somewhere near you. And I also have an email list, Substack newsletter. If people go to davidrovics.com, they can find it and get on Substack, and that's where I put out essays and podcasts and that I record with this microphone, because I saw your mic and thought, oh, that's the one I need to get. That's before I realized everybody else already had one. So,
well, David, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Ron. Great pleasure.
All right, that was David Rovics. Check out all of his stuff. Music for the 1000 podcast is provided by Andrew Sexton. Check out his podcast, the Baywatching Podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Please do leave us a review. Make sure you're subscribed. Help us get the word out about the show. And if you want to support this show on the sustainability end, you can do so over at patreon.com/RobFlacone. For a Give What You Can level, you get all kinds of cool content not available anywhere else. And we do a Zoom hang once a month. It's a really cool community. And that's all for a Give What You Can level. That's patreon.com/RobFlacone. Guys, got a fun ending for today's show. So David and I talked a lot about the song St. Patrick's Battalion. After we ended the interview, he asked me, he said, hey, are you going to include the song in the episode? And I said, well, I would never include somebody's music without their permission. Do you want me to include it? And he said, yes, I do. So via permission from David, please enjoy the song that we referenced a lot in this episode. And by the way, if you like this song, you will like David's music. Like a lot of David's music is kind of a similar theme to this song. Like he talks about things in history and does so in a very clever, folky way. And I've been a fan of his for over 2 decades. But don't take it from me. Listen to this song, and if you enjoy it, you're going to love what he does. But so this is a first for 1000. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, this is a first. We are going to feature the original music of David Rovics. Please enjoy. By the way, if any copyright law people are out there, this is via permission. David asked for this song to be included and gave permission. Here is David Rovics with one of my favorite songs, period. One of my favorite songs, St. Patrick's Battalion.
My name is John Riley. I'll have your ear only a while. I left my dear home in Ireland. It was death, starvation, or exile. When I got to America, it was my duty to go. Enter the army and slog across Texas to join in the war against Mexico. It was there in the pueblos and hillsides that I saw the mistake I had made. Part of a conquering army with the morals of a bayonet blade. So in the midst of these poor dying Catholics, screaming children, the burning stench of it all, myself and 200 Irishmen decided to rise to the call. From Dublin City to San Diego, we witnessed freedom denied. So we formed the St. Patrick Battalion and we fought on the Mexican side. We formed the St. Patrick Battalion and we fought on the Mexican side. We marched beneath the green flag of St. Patrick, emblazoned with Erin Goldbra. Bright with the harp and the shamrock and Libertad para la Republica. Just 50 years after Wolfe Tone, 5,000 miles away, the Yanks called us a legion of strangers, and they can talk as they may. But from Dublin City to San Diego. We witnessed freedom denied, so we formed the St. Patrick Battalion, and we fought on the Mexican side. We formed the St. Patrick Battalion, and we fought on the Mexican side. We fought them in 5 major battles. Churubusco was the last. Overwhelmed by the cannons from Boston, we fell after each mortar blast. Most of us died on that hillside at the service of the Mexican state. So far from our occupied homeland, we were heroes and victims of fate. From Dublin City to San Diego, we witnessed freedom denied. So we formed the St. Patrick Battalion, and we fought on the Mexican side. From Dublin City to San Diego, we witnessed freedom denied. So we formed the St. Patrick Battalion, and we fought on the Mexican side. We formed the St. Patrick Battalion, and we fought on the Mexican side.